Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, welcome to another episode of Creative Piecemeal Podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi, and I'm joined by my friend and luthier, Aubrey Alexander. She graduated from the Violin Making School of America with honors, and while still in school, began working at Moritz Violins, assisting John Moritz with instrument making, repair, and restoration. After graduating, she continued working in the Moritz shop until she was asked to join the teaching staff at the Violin Making School of America, where she taught for 5 years. She then spent several years in Michigan at Grand Rapids Violins before moving to Illinois, where she now works for SAP Violins.
Hi, how are you?
Hello. It's good to have you on the show. Listeners, I have a very sporadic blog, and Aubrey was one of my first blog guests on there, and so now we get to deep dive a little bit more into her very cool profession of making instruments on the podcast.
Howdy, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We're gonna jump right into who or what inspired you to become a musician and later a luthier.
So the very first time that I saw a luthier's studio was when I was about 8 years old, and my mom had taken me with her to pick up my older sister's violin. And I was just fascinated by the whole thing, the tools, the instruments. It was really an experience for me. Then when I was around, I want to say 13 or 14, I started to really consider violin making as something that I wanted to do, because I was always more fascinated by my cello itself than actually playing it or practicing it, if that makes sense.
That is really awesome.
Thank you. And let me know if, because I'm polishing a violin while we talk, let me know if this sound is awkward.
I think we're okay. We're okay. If anything, cool. It gives us a very realistic account of what you're doing. Oh, it's so pretty though. Listeners, it's really great. There's no strings on it and there's no pegs yet, but it just looks gorgeous.
Thank you. Yes, this one I've just finished antiquing, and it is in that stage where it needs its kind of final polish to really pull everything together. So I have a few things here to work with. I have something that I learned about from my boss. He calls it black polish. It's his recipe, and it has it gives a really nice satiny kind of luster to the varnish. And so I'm alternating in certain spots. I'm using black polish, and in some spots I'm just using a dry alcohol rag, but I'm trying to kind of simulate different levels of shine in different areas of the instrument.
Since you're doing that, it's sparking so many questions on my end. How long does it typically take to varnish an instrument?
The varnishing process hopefully is a long time. I like to tan the instruments for as long as I physically can, which is usually a week, but I would really prefer it to be 2 or 3. And we use these things called light boxes, which are essentially a bunch of ultraviolet lights hooked up to like a fan and humidity control system. And you first tan the wood to give a little bit more oxidation, a little bit more color to it. Then the varnishing itself may only take like applying the varnish may only take a week or so, but then removing and antiquing, that process can take a very long time, especially for me. So I would say it takes me longer to do the varnish and finish work on an instrument than it does to actually make the instrument. I think that's true for a lot of luthiers. I'm not sure.
Is there anything that's like a favorite part of the building and making process, and also a least favorite part?
Yes. Yeah, my favorite thing to do are the elements of restoration that overlap with the making process. So that would be things like doing a neck set, a neck reset, a bass bar, the full setup. And by setup, I mean like pegs, bridge, sound post. But those elements that you would do frequently in a restoration shop that also would happen when you're doing new making. Those are my favorite. I could do that all day. And fortunately, a lot of the work that I do outside of making my own instruments is a lot of setup work as well, and that's my absolute favorite.
Is there anything you don't like about the making process?
Antiquing. It's not that I don't like how it looks. I do love how it looks. It's just the actual going through the motions of doing that. I prefer straight instruments personally, but a lot of players prefer antiqued instruments. So you kind of have to step outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah, that's interesting you mentioned that because one of my violins I used to own was antiqued and it looked cool, but I didn't like that it wasn't antiqued by me, like from natural wear and play and love.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a violin now that my oldest sister brought me back as a gift from Mittenwald that's not
Cool.
antiqued. And so I get to make it that way with,
Mm-hmm.
just by playing it and enjoying it. And I like that. I feel like it gives it, at least in my opinion, more character because it's personalized to look old by just literally just using the instrument.
Yes, that actually brings up a good point. At least something that I think about a lot. The way that people naturally antique, like the way that players naturally antique their instruments through use today, is, at least I think, quite a bit different than the way that happened 200 years ago. It's interesting for me to see some violins that makers have done like a full 350 years worth of antiquing on. And then to think about looking at a violin that's 100 years old today that was originally not antiqued by the maker, but has gone through. I just feel like that because of the way instruments are taken care of and the improvements in cases and the improvements in the knowledge of the players, they wear differently today than they would have worn in the past, naturally, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, of course. Because in the old days, there wasn't, air conditioning and heating and humidifiers and all of that,
And the actual contact points between the instruments and the cases are different. The way that they're played is a little bit different. I mean, you wouldn't find people today like setting their scroll down on a hard surface like this when they're tuning. That's how a lot of wear happens on that side of the scroll right there. I've never seen a modern player do that because they know it's harmful to the wood wear over time. Like, you do it for 2 seconds, it's not going to do anything, but the way people handle them, and they're more careful with the varnish.
Do you have to revarnish instruments frequently?
That's something that'll happen if you're a new maker. Like if you're, for example, this violin I varnished it once. I didn't like it. I stripped it. And I varnished it a second time. That happens, and that's just part of the process. And actually, it's quite a benefit because a lot more color will go into the wood each time you strip it. You strip it too many times, then it's kind of becomes the surface of your canvas becomes not what you want it to be, but it's still workable. So that's completely normal. You wouldn't strip a violin that someone else made, though. That's kind of a no-no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kind of like an unwritten rule, right?
If a player came to me and said, "Oh, I really love how my violin sounds, but I just don't like how it looks," I'd say, "Well, like it looks like you're needing to look for a different instrument." It's not really about it's about how they sound. It shouldn't really be about how they look. So in a perfect world, it shouldn't be about how they look. It should be about how they sound.
Yes.
But yeah, people do listen with their eyes instead of their ears on occasion, which isn't bad.
What is a piece of advice from the luthier world that you always ignore and one that you always follow?
I always follow environmental rules such as humidity, temperature. The environment that the instrument is in needs to be stable to ensure that it is at its best health. Like I wouldn't leave a violin in a super humid room. I wouldn't leave a violin in a super dry room. I wouldn't leave it in the car, for example. So I definitely always follow those rules for good reason. But I don't really ignore any other advice. I take everything in, but I would say that there's things that I pay more attention to than there's some advice I pay much more attention to than other advice, but I don't ignore any of it.
You recently won some awards for your bridges it was an international competition, is that correct?
Yes, there were people from, I don't know how many countries. It's on their website. If you go to the website, you can see like the stats of who entered the year before. But yes, it's international. There were people entered from all over the world. Yeah.
Nice. What was that like? I mean, did you plan on entering it or it just sort of happened? And
I planned to enter it this year. Some of my friends had entered the previous year. And what it was like is you just carve some bridges and put them in a box and ship them off to England, and then you hear back a few months later. But it was very reassuring for me because I think a lot of artists, a lot of craftspeople may doubt themselves, may be a little bit hard on themselves, like I certainly am. I'm my own worst critic. And so getting a little bit of validation from the outside world, that's helpful. It reassures me.
I think you're definitely not alone in that, people in the creative arts are always doubting themselves and then, realizing, they have so much more to offer than they realize. But when you're in the process of creating, it's hard to try and filter out that negative.
Yes, and I'm constantly negative. I'm very, very difficult on myself.
So when you are making instruments, what are some pieces that you enjoy playing when you're just sort of messing around, trying them out, trying to figure out their sound and personality?
There's a few that cover a pretty good range of like across all the strings. So I would say the second movement of the first suite for unaccompanied cello, that's my favorite. And then also there's I think a Brahms sonata that starts pretty low and ends pretty high, and it gives you a pretty good overall concept of the tone of the instruments. I play cello, as you know, because I went to college with Kevin, and we were both in the same cello studio. But I don't really play violin that well. That's kind of an embarrassment to me, quite frankly. I don't play violin very well at all, which is ironic to me.
But you make them very well.
I make them well. I don't play them well. Yeah, it's good to have friends that play violin.
I've seen online that some luthiers like to make tiny instruments. Is that something that you ever might get into just for fun?
As I probably wouldn't get into that as a project because not as many people, there's not a lot of a market for that. However, like from a realistic standpoint, there's not a reason for me to make one unless it were commissioned. However, they are adorable. Tiny violins are the cutest thing. I forget her name, but there's a woman in Europe that makes ridiculously, like accurately sized, wonderful little tiny instruments, and she posts about it on Instagram, and that's really fun to watch. I don't see myself doing that.
Yeah, I imagine it's already hard enough to make a full-size instrument. Much less a half-sized or like miniature for like a mouse or something.
Yes, I did make a half-size violin when I was in violin making school. It was part of the curriculum. You had to make a fractional, and mine was a little half-size Del Jesu model that I still have the templates for. I don't have the mold for it anymore, but I have the templates, and it was ironically much more difficult to carve a small scroll than it was to carve a normal size scroll.
Are there any secrets of the trade or tricks of the trade that you are allowed to share with musicians?
I wouldn't really call it so much a secret, but the way that your strings are wrapped around your pegs makes a difference to how it can actually impede the peg from functioning properly. Um, I think like maybe 50% of the time that someone comes in and says that, oh, my pegs are something wrong with my pegs, and you look at it and their strings are wound in such a way that it's actually acting as a lever to want to pop the peg back out. The path that the string takes is very important one as it's going from the bridge over the nut into the peg box. So a lot of people have that issue. So like looking at how your pegs are actually wound, how your strings are wound on your pegs, that can solve some problems.
That's good to know. Yeah. I actually really don't like changing my strings on any of my instruments just because of the whole peg winding aspect. That's my least favorite. I noticed there are a few musicians, professional and amateur, that like to not use chin rests. Have you encountered that quite a bit in your work?
I have not, mostly because I don't deal one-on-one with a lot of players. Like I work in a shop full time doing restoration, and then I do my own making on the side. And so I don't spend a lot of time interacting with players. So if that's a thing, I'm not familiar. But I would say that different chin rests and different locations of the chin rests can make a difference for tone. And if you don't have a chin rest on an instrument and you're holding it and squeezing it with your chin like that, that can make a difference for tone.
I've always wondered, do different tailpieces make a difference as well, tone-wise, especially on like the larger instruments like cellos and basses?
Yeah, that's something that I haven't done a ton of exploring with, but yes, a different tailpiece. It's because the tailpiece is vibrating as well. So a different tailpiece, a different weight, a different length, a different after length, all of that can make a difference. That's kind of going into like adjustment of an instrument.
Oh, it's so fascinating. Everything you do is just so fascinating.
Thank you.
Who are some of your favorite composers? And do you ever listen to that when you're creating?
Yes. I'm into like slightly ominous piano music right now, so I'm listening to that's relaxing but also not too violent. That's really popular right now in my head. So like the Gymnopédies, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. That's stuff like that.
Nice. Do you ever find that your work goes quicker when you're listening to music, or
No, it goes very much slower because if I'm working on my own stuff, I have headphones in, I'm listening to a playlist, I'm quite often dancing a little bit, like lots of dance breaks. So it doesn't go faster. It's more of like, but it's fun. But it doesn't go faster.
but that's good though. You know, you're bringing even more joy to what you do, and I bet it seeps into the soul of the instrument, right?
That would be nice if the instruments could like absorb by osmosis like some energy from me. That would be cool. I'm not sure if that's
What's one of your favorite things about your career field in general?
it's the same, but it's different every day. Like if you're handed a violin to set it up, there's certain things that are gonna always be the same, and there's always gonna be things that are very different. So it's different but similar every day, and you're not quite sure until you open a violin what you're gonna see on the inside. And on a side note, I did get to open a violin recently for repair, and I think I was the first person in 150 years to open that violin, and that was a really cool experience.
Wow.
That just based on how the top looked against the ribs and the interior, that may have been the first time the top was off, and that's cool. That's really cool.
Are they usually pretty dusty on the inside?
Yeah, rosin works in through the F holes. You know, when you're playing, the rosin is flying all over the place. It'll go in through the Fs, dust, dirt, debris, skin cells. Not to gross anybody out, but all of that gets amalgamated inside. Turns it and turn. If it's just left there, the rosin gets like kind of sticky if it gets hot, and so that holds on to dirt too. And that's part of the cool. That's another part of the cool things about like instruments over time is seeing that kind of natural dirt build up, and then you also get not a dust bunny. We don't call them that. We call them tone balls. But eventually, all that dust and dirt will roll up into a little ball that will fly around on the inside of the instrument. I personally think it's bad juju to take a tone ball out of a violin, but I know that people do it. So they don't have that attachment to the history of that dirt.
That's interesting.
Oh, Raven, would you like to say hi?
Do you have a
My
shop
cat.
kitty?
I do have a shop. Well, I have a kitty. She's my manager, and she wants to be in the middle of my business right now. Every time I'm working on something at home, she comes up and tries to get in my lap. So I have a box on each bench for her, and usually she'll get in the box. Yeah, go get in your box. Here, I'll give it to you. Sorry for the distraction there.
It's okay. It's cute.
There you go. Right there. So she just kind of grumbled at me. Now she's in her box.
So what is some of the best advice you've received in your industry so far?
The way your violin looks today is not the way that instrument is going to look forever. So when you make an instrument and varnish it and antique it and send it out to the world, it may come back in 5 years with some natural wear on it. It's going to get used. And so when it comes back, don't expect it to look, I mean, it'll look similar, of course, but they're not going to stay stationary in the world. They're going to be used. So just be prepared for that. And that's quite fun to see your work come back like every few years to kind of see how it's naturally aging on its own. That's very useful.
So if you could travel to other countries, and maybe you've already done this, to look at like instruments in museums or check out other shops, where do you think you'd want to travel to?
Oh, I would go to Europe. I would go to Europe for like 4 months and just go from major metropolitan to major metropolitan area and just see everything. And I would probably start by flying out of DC. That's the kind of trip that takes a few cellos to finance. So, to take that much time off and just do nothing but look at instruments and surround yourself and that kind of study. Yeah. I haven't been to Europe since the last time I took my Oma. Well, I didn't take her; she took me. But the last time my Oma and I went to Germany to see her family, I haven't been back since then. I have a longing.
You guys use a lot of different tools. Are you all a bit like chefs where you have very specific, like, this is my one spatula kind of thing?
Yes. It gets that. Well, I have, for example, I'll grab them since they're right here. I have to carve a bridge. I have 7 different knives.
Wow.
I know some people. So this one, the handle's not on it because I need to sharpen it. But this one is the one I use probably the most for like a violin bridge, and I might use it for 80% of the bridge. But there's certain times when a different knife works better for certain parts. So I have all of my knives freshly ground here so I can sharpen them later. It's the shape of the edge. I don't know if you can see this without me cutting myself, but it's slightly curved, but it's still pretty straight. There's a slight curve to it though. How straight the bevel of the knife is makes a difference to how it feels in your hand, and also what gets cut with a particular motion of your hand. So having some straight knives, having some curved knives, that helps. But yeah, we are very specific about our tools. A lot of the tools we have are custom made. Particularly, I have some friends who are very handy with 3D printers and with machining. And you can get one-off clamps, one-off knives. Like this knife I got from a friend of mine, Elion, who does a lot of knife smithing, and she made this knife. It's amazing. You can't buy that anywhere. You have to be friends with Elion to get that knife. And I use that for carving bridges for most of the carving I do on bridges.
Nice. I'm assuming you all get over the fear of like accidentally chopping off a finger pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm not really afraid of hurting myself because I know it's going to happen, but I'm not going to cut off a finger. There's not a ton of heavy machinery in violin making. Like you might use a power jointer to like roughly flatten the back, and you use a bandsaw, which is a relatively safe saw. If you're paying attention, obviously you can hurt yourself, but it's mostly, there's a lot of hand carving, chisels, gouges, knives, and as long as you're holding the tool safely and working in a direction not like directly towards yourself, it's relatively safe. I don't use some of these larger power tools that I know that people have hurt themselves seriously on. I do know a few violin makers who are missing like parts of fingers from jointers or table saws. I have a healthy fear of table saws. I'm not a fan.
Yeah, I don't blame you there. I would probably be afraid of just all sharp objects, which is why I'm not in your industry, no matter how enticing it sounds and exciting it sounds. What books would you recommend for people who are wanting to get into luthiery, or even those interested in improving and leveling up their game?
I'd say most of the books that I would recommend would be for those who are already violin makers, like as resource books. But there's also, I'm not sure, I can't remember off the top of my head the name of the gentleman who wrote it, but there is a book on violin making that was written by, I think Brian Gerber is his name. And that's pretty awesome. If you're like a new amateur maker, or you're about to go to school and you want like a good textbook reference, like that's pretty much as close as you'll get nowadays. But then like for established or people already in school, Any of those big compilations that have lots of full-size photographs. Just immerse yourself in imagery.
That would make sense because you sort of studying how to make it through pictures, because you can't necessarily talk to the old makers because they're long since gone,
They're dead.
Yeah. If you could meet any of them, who would it be?
That's easy. Caterina Guarneri, Del Jesu's wife. I would love to know her. I would like to have dinner with her. I'd like to ask her what it was really like.
Nice. I did not. This is something new that I'm learning. I did not realize that Del Jesu's wife also made instruments. So,
but yeah, I would Caterina Guarneri.
Cool. I'll have to Google it, and maybe they'll someday make like a Netflix movie about it or something.
Oh, that would be great. That would be awesome.
And speaking of traveling and people from the past, if you could travel to any other place in time, where would it be?
1816, because a lot of my favorite instruments, like the ones that I use for models to copy, the one that this violin is based on, would have been around 100 years old then, and they would have been naturally worn and antiqued for the time period. Loved to see them in that state, because now, of course, when you get to view these instruments, you only see them in their, what's the time difference between 1715 and 2023? How many years is that? You see them then. I would have loved to see them 200 years ago, actually 200 years ago. That's where I would want to go. But I would promptly want to come back because I wouldn't want to actually live in 1816 temporarily, short trip.
Yes. Just enough to take a look and get inspired and come back.
Not get cholera. Yeah. That's important. Or the plague.
Yes.
But side note, there was a very bad plague in Italy where many violin makers of importance were actually killed. And one of the only violin makers left of a certain level was Niccolo Amati.
If we snuck a peek at your music collection, what are some things that we would find?
Right now, there's a lot of ethereal music, not only piano, but also there's a band called Explosions in the Sky that has, it's all, there's no words, there's no lyrics, but it's just kind of a surround sound. So I'm listening to a lot of that right now. And then also there's some pop music that I like. I like a lot of bluegrass. But right now, a lot of ethereal kind of rock music and a lot of piano music as well.
If you had no limits or budgets or barriers on a project, what would you do?
The violin I'm holding up right now is based on a Pietro Graneri of Mantua, which is my favorite maker. And I just recently drew a new mold with a compass and then took that into the computer and then CNC'd out a mold. And I'm going to start triplets, 3 violin. I have a cello back that's too small for a cello, so it'll be 4 one-piece violin backs. And so they're all going to have matching wood. And the spruce billets I have are from, I don't think they're identical tree, but they're from the same forest. And I'm going to make triplets on that. And that's probably going to be a year and a half long process.
That is exciting. How do you sort of realize that like one model's a favorite over another one?
For me, it's like everybody makes Strad models. Everybody makes Del Jesu models. There's certain ones that are more popular because there's more of those instruments that have been documented and are around that we can see. But for me, looking at like the outline and the F holes, I think that I would be better suited to a more clean Guarneri model than a Strad. This is me personally. Like when I carve a corner, they tend to look a certain way, and so however my handedness shows up, I think it shows up better when it's a kind of a cleanish Guarneri model. And Peter of Mantua's are just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. Particularly the ones from like 1707 to 1715, I think is my favorite little year span.
That's really neat. And that's awesome that you get to embark on those projects and just sort of immerse yourself in that creativity and that history and reviving that.
Well, I hope that my instruments come out looking half as good as the original. It's really quite depressing to see the real thing after making one yourself, and you see all of Because you can only see so much from looking at pictures, and then when you actually get to see one in your hands and you look at the varnish compared to the varnish on your instrument, it's very depressing sometimes.
Oh,
Well, because of course, I'm not 315 years old. I'm a different maker. I can try as hard as I can, but it'll always be an Alexander instead of something else.
but that's okay though. You get to put your own spin on it, and maybe somebody 200 years from now is going, "Oh man, I wish I could meet Aubrey Alexander."
I'm not sure that would happen, but that would be cool.
So, one final question. If you could step into my shoes, what would you have asked yourself that I didn't?
I would tell you about the coolest cello I ever played since I play cello, or the best experience of playing a different instrument, which was a Nickelodeon cello, and that thing played me. It was effortless. It was like the bow to the string. It just spoke instantly. The setup, everything was just really finely adjusted. It was amazing.
Kind of like driving a really, really fancy car, right?
Yeah, or catching a really big fish. Like it was just awesome. Catching a big bass, that's just awesome.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. And listeners, please check the show notes for her official bio and more information. As always, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.